I'm Bob Henderson. I'm the Nomad Dad. Part 2, Western leadership lives in a fantasy world. I just don't understand this. Well, I guess, follow the money. If you look, we're talking about 4 existential issues of the day I talked about last time. The Green Revolution, crime, immigration, and financial. And this is throughout the Western world. It's not just in the U.S. So I talked about Janet Yellen testifying to Congress, I believe it was 2021, talking about $150 trillion is what it's going to cost for the Green Revolution over a 30-year period. So that's $5 trillion. Wouldn't be just from the U.S. This would be shared throughout the world. But let's face it, the U.S., the largest economy, would be paying much of that. So right now we're running $2 trillion annual deficits, add another probably couple trillion on top of that. You think inflation's bad now, look. Especially on top of an existing $33 trillion debt that's projected to go up $2 trillion each year. And this doesn't count new green spending. But a lot of these donors to the left of center party are coming from the green beneficiaries. And that's why they're going to continue with this, whether it's in the United States or abroad. Of course, the other issue I discussed was crime and immigration and the financial side of things. But let's go back to the green a little bit more, because I mentioned that there was a poll taken and that, Americans are somewhat concerned. Although if you look at all the issues, I think it's maybe 10th or 11th most important issue to the average American. And they'd be willing to spend $10 a month more to do something about it. That's not going to get it done. I've written down a few things that have happened in the last few months. The green energy stocks are really taking it on the chin. Why? Well, here's an example. In New York State, they denied the wind projects developers asking for almost a 7% increase this year in electricity cost to consumers. They're asking for tax incentives and about a 7% increase in electricity costs because they are finding that it is costing them a lot more money to produce the wind. Now, wind is free, but the electricity from the wind is extremely ultra expensive. That's what the problem is. In the UK, the Telegraph says electricity prices would have to rise 70% to pay for more wind farms. Otherwise, the companies cannot build those wind farms. So they need subsidies from the government. This is a part of this $150 trillion we're talking about. But it hasn't been appropriated in many cases. Chuck Schumer says that if the Democrats win the trifecta, both houses of Congress and the White House in 2024, come 2025, he's going to add an extra $2 trillion on top of the money we already spend, which generates about a $2 trillion annual deficit, to go to the green projects. It's still not going to be enough. All these subsidized companies, they cannot make it. A couple other examples. In this particular case, GE, their offshore wind unit, posted $1 billion loss last year. Higher costs, including higher interest rates. Why are the interest rates higher? Because of the prolific spending. It has increased inflation over the last few years. Ford is losing over $60,000 per EV. Similar quarters have shown big losses on each EV that they produce. Oh, and by the way, this is going to be interesting politically. The UAW had been on strike against the big three in the United States. They got big wage increases. I suspect they should. That's fine. Good for them. But if we went entirely to EVs, you're going to need 40% fewer United Auto workers to build EVs. So this is going to have an interesting political effect. Mercedes and Tesla. Elon Musk says the demand has peaked for now, and we're giving people money to buy EVs. They are very expensive. The average person cannot afford them. But Elon Musk, and who better as the head of Tesla to say that the demand has peaked for now, and they're not going to be able to make the kind of money. In fact, they may lose in many cases. Kansas has to use a coal plant to power their EV battery plant. This seems at cross purposes. Jackson Hole, Wyoming, in the Cowboy State Daily, we were told that Jackson Hole, Wyoming, one of the wealthiest counties in the country, supposedly with brilliant people running things, bought electric buses, 8 of them. None of them work, and the producer of the buses went out of business. There's a lot of natural gas in Wyoming. I think they're the 9th or 10th largest producer in the country. Couldn't have we used Wyoming natural gas? Electricity costs are soaring in that state. And there are plenty of ways to provide energy in Wyoming, which is one of the biggest energy states in the country. And because of some of these initiatives where they have to buy a certain amount of wind power, it's increasing costs at a very high rate. So I talked about in the UK and the increase in electricity costs. I'm not here to defend the utilities, but if they have to buy a certain amount of this or that in order to be in compliance with somebody, it's going to raise prices. And that's not their fault. These are government mandates that the government can say, well, blame the utility companies. It's not our fault. They mask it. And this is what the problem is. We're going to have to think this green revolution. I'm not saying that eventually it shouldn't come to the fore, but I think we're rushing things, and I'm not sure it's been well thought through. I think a lot of people are going to get rich off of it, and I think that's largely the point, to be honest with you. And the public doesn't really want to spend a lot of money in that direction. Switzerland, I think those people are very solid people, thinking people. The Greens lost 1/4 of their seats in the parliament in a recent election. And in European capitals, the Greens are losing a lot, and the parties that are for unfettered immigration are losing. And so we're coming to some extent to a moment of, well, you're going to have to make up your mind what it is that you want to do, and reality is beginning to bite you in the rear end. As I discussed last week with crime and immigration in the U.S. and part of the green policies. Some of these companies are going out of business. Some of them are losing a tremendous amount of money. And green stocks and clean energy stocks have not had a good go of it. Well, most of the rest of the market has. Well, then we got the issue of education and the fact that kids missed a year or two of school around the world. What does that look like going forward in 10 or 20 years when kids don't have the education they need? They're the ones that are going to be taking care of you in your old age. They're the ones that may be flying your airplanes or providing this service or that service. I think it's a huge problem. And the fact that I think in the United States, we're teaching kids to hate the country. I'm all for teaching people the facts of history, but letting them think for themselves rather than jamming an ideology into them. And then you look at some of the social problems, and I think this is one of the other existential issues of the day. I mean, you've got people that should know better. I'm going to get in trouble for this, but my goodness, men cannot have children. And what about Title IX? It's 50 years old now, allowing money for women to have sports, and now we're letting men come into women's sports. How's that pro-woman? I mean, how is that sensible at all? And this is my opinion, but I think a lot of people object to that. And this is a problem that I think a lot of people would like to talk about for one reason. It obscures the financial problems that we are feeling. It's just another issue to divide and conquer and to get people's minds off maybe some of the real big problems. Not that that's not a problem in my view, but the real big problems of as Jamie Dimon's saying, we're in a situation, a terrible financial situation we haven't seen in decades. But we won't discuss the issues because we're off on some of these tangential issues. And this just concerns me greatly. I just say, my view as an older person now, I don't think the solutions are that difficult. The so-called educated class, you have to have us in power. These are such complicated issues, most things in life are not that difficult. And most of them are pretty easily solvable. If you just used some common sense, And you trust the population to tell them, here's the problem, not sugarcoat it, here's the problem, but we can fix it. We're going to need your help. Might include a little bit of pain, but we can do it. These problems are not insurmountable. That's my view. I'm pragmatic. I'm for what works. I'm Bob Henderson, Nomad Dad.